For those of you who do not know, Netflix has just released a show called 1899 that is being met with critical and fan praise. It seems to be their current hit of the week. Netflix often cycles through a lot of hits throughout the year, but 1899 is making some waves. Undercutting the success of 1899, though, an author named Mary Cagnon has come out and said that it is straight up plagiarizing her story, Black Silence. And like a lot of people, my immediate gut reaction was, screw Netflix, I hate how often this happens, it sucks, and let's support this author. And as a result, I stopped watching 1899 and I read Black Silence, which is a pretty quick graphic novel, and what I read there didn't reflect the 2 episodes of 1899 that I'd watched, so I went on over and finished the rest of 1899, and I think Mary Cagnon is completely and utterly wrong. And also, I know it's very tempting to just get mad at Netflix and say like, they plagiarized, they're bad. But what you have to remember is an accusation of plagiarism for 1899 is not necessarily a shot at the platformer, it's a shot at the writers. And the writers behind 1899 are 2 German writers who also wrote the very original and successful Dark. And after finishing 1899, I do not think it's as good as Dark, but yeah, it's a very good follow-up from 2 German writers who clearly pulled from some very common tropes and imagery used throughout all kinds of dark sci-fi genres. And so I want to go through point by point and show that I think Mary is not only wrong when saying that these writers stole from her, but also there's a case to be made that's even stronger that she took from something else. Do I think she did? Absolutely not. But in a world full of thousands of stories being put out all the time, to point at a few examples of common imagery and plot devices and character tropes and say that it's flat out plagiarism is ludicrous. But Daniel, what does it seem like Mary could have pulled from? Event Horizon. In fact, the similarities between Black Silence and Event Horizon are so abundant, this Twitter user, while I was in the middle of writing the script for this video, made the same observation I did. Before I get any deeper into this and start explaining what exactly these stories are, though, I want to say no one should be trying to attack Mary Cagnon, and this isn't some hit piece on her character. Please do not tweet at her, attack her, or anything along those lines. I just think she's wrong, and people shouldn't be punished for being wrong. And this is also my subjective opinion on the matter. I'm just trying to do what I can to help the reputation of 1899, which seems to be kind of being swallowed by this controversy, despite, in my opinion, and as I'll try to prove here, it having basically minimal to no merit. So getting into what exactly these stories are, 1899 is the story of a migrant ship coming from Europe to America, filled with a multicultural crew that encounters a lost vessel and mysteries arise. Black Silence is a multicultural crew on an interstellar journey to a planet, and the biggest hurdle in this video comes into play, because there's a reveal in 1899 I don't want to spoil. I specifically thought it was kind of obvious going into it, especially around like episode 3 or 4, but it's also going to be what a lot of people are pointing at as like the smoking gun. So at the end of the video, I'm going to do a full spoiler segment where I go through why I think this smoking gun isn't as concrete as what a lot of people think it is, and it's going to instead rely on a lot more we're going to touch on in this video, which is just tried and true tropes that a lot of sci-fi, especially of this kind, utilize. But even there, Mary pointed at the multicultural crew angle and said, this is a clear similarity that they're pulling from my story. But one, claiming ownership on a multicultural crew doesn't really hold up when you know this is a staple trope of sci-fi space crews going all the way back to the original Star Trek and continuing on to modern movies like Sunshine. And then saying that you invented this in a show about a migrant vessel from Europe coming to America is stealing from you for it doesn't really hold up. But there is also this tweet where they're pointing at certain imagery, one, close-ups of eyes with pyramids within, because there is also a similarity which looks like big black pyramids being brought within the narrative. And that actually does seem like a really good point, until you realize big spooky pyramids or shapes of all kinds is another trope for big old mysteries set in secluded locations, to the point where, guess what? Yes, again, Event Horizon has that with a sphere, but I also, writing my book, in the first draft had a big old giant, yes, black pyramid in it, and I changed it from when I was doing research into monoliths, and I realized how many of them were big pyramids. It just kind of turned me off from doing that, so I shifted it over to being a different shape. But they also talk about the usage of the shapes within the eyes, and the close-up imagery of the eyes as a whole, which that's a very common framing, and I don't think a very particularly good point to begin with, but the utilization of the shape within the eyes is very different for the narrative itself. One, the story Black Silence is using it to represent some influence, almost a trance, whereas in the show, 1899, again, trying to keep it spoiler-free here, it's more about a portal conversation. I'll leave it at that. There's also pointing to the fact that there is a doctor character prevalent within the plot, but again, not only is this one of the most common professions for, again, both of these sci-fi genres that share many parallels, but more importantly, the characterization of these two is polar opposite. Yeah, they have debatably a kind of similar origin, where we see one is having this portal thing with an insane asylum, while the other is a prisoner at first, but like, that doesn't really equal the same, and their growth, development, and what they do, beat by beat, chapter to chapter, episode to episode, has no similarity whatsoever. And beating a dead horse here, the Doctor from Black Silence and the Doctor from Event Horizon do have incredible similarities to their actual narrative beats. I am not saying one took from the other, but I am saying if you're going to put a doctor in a spacefaring adventure like this, having them go a bit mad seems like a fun way to go that I think multiple people could think of. Yeah, they're different in some ways, and again, I'm not trying to say Black Silence stole from Event Horizon, but I'm saying if you're going to be making these surface level claims of taking, they become so easy that you could level them at nearly any story. Event Horizon came out a long time before Black Silence. Did you steal from it? No, I don't think you did. I just think if you're writing a certain kind of story, it's very natural for similar plot beats that, within the full context, will be very different to arise within the narrative. But I want to go ahead and stop talking about this surface level stuff that you can easily continually make connections with, and instead talk about what the story is actually about and the narrative beats that are relevant for these surface level observations, because underneath the coding of just these surface level observations, the stories themselves are entirely different. And even the multicultural angle, well, it's certainly there in Black Silence, it doesn't really do a whole lot for the narrative aside from some very quick little things, whereas in 1899, it becomes this very woven into LGBTQ+ and racial divides within the ship, and it's very prevalent for a lot of conflict, and the reason the setting is feeling the way it is in this oppressive, trapped ship. It's also very important to me to note that Baron Bo Odar and John friends, I'm severely dyslexic, and I'm sorry, that one's just gonna elude me there, are respected and established writers who have already penned a show called Dark that has a whole lot of stylistic elements similar to 1899, which to me is indicative of it not being stolen, but coming from a place of passion and truly development from them. What we've kind of ended up with here is almost a reverse Kimba situation, where Kimba was a really long-running show that people cherry-picked certain plot elements to accuse The Lion King, a singular movie, from stealing from it, which was entirely false. And now here for 1899 and Black Silence is a very small story that's able to draw parallels to some specific beats within a somewhat longer story told in a different medium. But the reason this is even easier to take apart is with 1899 being so short and no gargantuan requirement the size of Kimba being needed to understand the nuances of the situation, you're able to kind of see that this person is reaching in just a day of viewership and reading. But okay, let's say you're not convinced still. Let's then look at all the things that are prevalent within 1899 that have absolutely no equivalent for Black Silence. Again, I'm going to say these completely out of context, trying to keep them to be spoiler-free-ish, but this is just to give you an example of how much more there is in 1899, and saying that it's plagiarized, not even just influenced, but plagiarized, is kind of insane. Ignoring the characterization of nearly everyone being entirely different, well, including the Doctor. Where is the boy equivalent? Where is the asylum mystery equivalent? You know, the whole TV thing? Where is the thematic equivalent? Do they even exist at all? The heart of these two stories is insanely different, where Black Silence makes one clear point rather quick. 1899 is just in a whole other park trying to accomplish a different thing, which I'm not trying to say it's better or worse. They're just doing different things. Where is the child murder equivalent? Where's the priest plotline equivalent? Where's the Asian over-sexualization and exploitation equivalent? Where's the company mystery equivalent? Which we do get like an HQ thing in Black Silence, but it's really not the same again. It's just something you'd be like, see, but actually look beyond and judge the narrative. Where's the sexually frustrated arranged marriage equivalent? Where is the, oh my god, the entire portal thing equivalent? Where is the betrayal of, where's the flashing away to further flesh out backstories? And where is the hypnotization and mass suicide equivalent? That imagery, holy crap, by the way. The coming back to life angle. And I could just go on and on. It's kind of shocking to me that the author ever made this claim, because I get on the visual impact level of especially the trailer how someone could think this. But it's like comparing Die Hard and Lord of the Rings. The more I just point out stuff that's different, the more it feels like people have room to assume there's more similarities. When if you read them both, or watch and read them, they're just not there. But what's bothering me most, though, about these accusations is the comparison when it comes to just extremely common visuals. Because if I just show you these two images, you can say, oh, that looks inspired. But one, the context around them, again, trying to keep it spoiler-free for a giant mystery show that just dropped, is radically different. But even ignoring that, having dramatic lit close-ups of people's heads, kind of a common thing in any kind of visual medium of storytelling. Now to get into spoilers for 1989 and the last big reveal, which for me totally rests the case over whether or not these stories are related at all. But if you do not want how 1899 ends ruined for you, please click off the video now and come back once you're done. 3, 2, 1, here we go. The big reveal of 1899 is that our main character, the Doctor we've been following for so long, is actually in a repeating simulation. The boat they found that's abandoned had her husband in the real world and son come on board their ship. Now, the antagonist of this whole thing, at least as we've been presented it and seen more and more sci-fi tech bleed through into this simulation of an old-timey ship, is her father. But that's actually not true. We learn he is stuck in this simulation as well, and it's her brother that's been running the whole thing, and they are actually on board a spaceship floating through space. We learn this because the last instance we see of a pyramid, no, is not a black one, it's a very colorful one, and it's a toy her husband hands her, which she then inserts her wedding band into, waking her up for the simulation and giving us this shot. That is the context around it. It is someone finally leaving a simulation they have been stuck in, and there's a lot more context and mystery around it. That's just me really boiling it down. And on the other hand, this image that the author put next to this reveal shot of waking up from the simulation, none of that? In fact, Black Silence has absolutely none of those elements I just talked about for antagonists or big reveals prevalent at all. The big black pyramid is more of like a Lovecraftian type horror, and this image we see of the character that is juxtaposed with the image from 1899 is actually our introduction to the character. It has absolutely no similarity in context aside from being a very commonly used dramatic shot. And that, to me, is the perfect summation of how this claim doesn't add up. All of the similarities are cherry-picked and surface level. They exist, but as Kayla pointed out to me after experiencing both of these stories, there's just as many similarities between 1899 and Prometheus or Black Silence and Event Horizon as Black Silence and 1899 have together. It's just not enough for this claim to have any merit, in my opinion. Well, Daniel, they could have been inspired by Black Silence and then developed something else from... That's not plagiarism! Let's give Mary the huge benefit of the doubt that these two Germans did actually come across her story and become inspired from it to write something that in the end result is very different with some surface level comparisons. That's not plagiarism. And if you're going to argue that it is, I'll inevitably ask you, okay, then at what point would it stop? It's okay to be inspired by stuff. We've all admitted that. You can be inspired by other things because it's kind of impossible not to be. So if these two guys were even inspired by Black Silence and then just entirely changed the story, the setting, the characters, added a whole bunch of new plot lines, and kept some very surface level common trope type beats, did they plagiarize? And that's the worst case scenario for 1899. And I don't even think that's necessarily true. I think what's far more likely is that there's just two stories that are in entirely different settings but have a similar MacGuffin-ish plot line with an entire other narrative constructed around it using a couple pieces of similar imagery, but even those imageries are fully functionally different within the story. And again, that's not even getting into the evaluation of theme, which for me was the final nail in the coffin, just to be like, absolutely not. I do not see these being the same thing, and I think the author was not maliciously wrong. And again, I want to hit that point. It's common for a lot of people, even writers, to not fully be aware of just how common tropes arising in media can be, and there definitely are some similarities here, and especially if you're very emotionally close to a story and feel like someone is doing something else similar to what you did, you can have a really strong reaction to that. But you also need to consider the other writers, that German duo who put a lot of time and effort into making this story, and now this controversy has become tied to the narrative of their critically acclaimed show, and if it is not properly dispelled, could harm their reputation forever. But hey, that's just my opinion. I actually do highly recommend you check out both Black Silence and 1899 and form your own opinion. Black Silence is available for free on the author's website. They definitely want people to be reading it, and I encourage you to do so. It was a fine enough story. And 1899 is streaming on Netflix now. And I am definitely a fan of the show and thought it really delivered, especially at the end, despite lulling in the middle a little bit. Form your own opinions and let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.